Hey, good afternoon. Welcome to the international session, and thanks so much for coming. I'm David Goralnik from the International eLearning Association and Kaleidoscope Learning in New York, and also Columbia University, also in New York. So I'm delighted to be here this afternoon. I will be speaking later, and I'll be your host for the afternoon, introducing the speakers and handling questions as we go until then as well. So we have a great program this afternoon, going to run from now until 6 o'clock. We hope all of you will stay for the entire time. We're just going to go ahead and get started. Our first speaker, we are delighted to have David Kelley. David is the Executive Vice President and Executive Director at the eLearning Guild from the US, from New York, runs a number of conferences, major events in the US, really the biggest learning development events in the United States. And we're just really pleased to have him. David's going to talk about emerging worldwide trends in digital learning. And please welcome David Kelley.
Thanks, everybody. Do you want me to stay on the mic? Stay here? Okay, I'm good. All right. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us here today. I will do my best to stay in front of the mic. I like to move, so that'll be challenging for me. But we're here to discuss the emerging worldwide trends in digital learning. Before I get started, I want to point out one URL. If you see that up on the screen, I know people like to take pictures of slides and get notes and such. That's really the only URL you'll notice. I know some people ask for copies of slides and such. My slides, you'll discover by the end of this, are fairly useless. They're more about pictures to back up what we're talking about. But that URL will take you to a page on my blog that will have the slides. It will have resources that I mentioned during the talk, as well as a host of additional resources that you can use to dive further into this. Now, when you do a presentation like this, and you're invited to do a talk like this, you know that the most important slide is this title slide. This slide that sets the tone for what you're going to be learning about and what people are going to be thinking. And I thought, looking at the emerging trends, maybe something around the fortune teller might fit appropriately there. But I thought it's a bit of a cliche. Maybe I should go with something that's more into the digital aspect of what we're talking about. I was asked to talk about digital learning, and maybe something representing the tech should be there. And I thought, well, what is the essence of what it is that I was invited to talk about? It's about peering into the future and talking about the trends and how they're going to shape the future of what we're doing. And when you think about it, if I was going to be fully transparent about predicting the future of how technology is going to change the way that we work, maybe I should go with a blindfolded monkey throwing darts. Because the reality is nobody knows what's going to happen. Now, my role at the eLearning Guild is such that my job now is to follow what's going on in the industry and to host conversations through articles and conferences that we do that help the industry make sense of what's going on and improve our practices. So I have a unique perspective on what the broad trends are. And I'm going to discuss a lot of that with you here today. But a lot of it comes down to the language that we use. Because when we're looking at something like this, we're talking about this idea of digital learning. And I preface it by saying, but I think it's important to look at that term before we dive into the trends, because how I define the term is often different than how we define it in practice. And yet we're at the Learning Technologies France exhibition here. Which is called the Learning Technologies France. Now that phrase in and of itself, learning technologies, is a phrase that I think that we use mistakenly. For instance, if you walked around this exhibition hall right now, the Learning Technologies exhibition, you'd see a lot of learning technologies, as you should. But what does that really mean? I would argue if you walked around here, you're not really seeing learning technologies. You're seeing education and training technologies. Which is not saying that that's better or worse. It's just acknowledging that that's what they are. And when you talk about digital learning, you're talking about something that's broader than just education and training. I'll give you an example of what I mean. I'm willing to bet my house on what I'm about to say. So I've not met most of you in this room, but I'm willing to guess that we've all had the exact same experience. We're at dinner with friends or family. The drinks are flowing, the food is fabulous, you look as wonderful as the people up on the screen here. And then the conversation, as much as it's going wonderfully, someone at the table will ask a question that brings the table to silence because no one knows the answer. Someone at that table will break the silence by saying what? I heard it over there. I'll Google it. I'll make a second bet on my house. I'm willing to bet that no one has been in that environment and someone broke the silence by saying, you know, that's a great question. I'm going to log into the LMS and find the answer. And that's not a criticism on the learning management systems. They are a critical tool for what we do in the context of education and training. But it is a very, very representative of the environment that we're in right now. Another thing no one at that table said was, you know what, I'm a self-directed learner. I'm going to pull out my phone and get the answer for myself. That's not what they do. That self-directed learner is our jargon. But the behaviors of self-directed learning aren't really learning behaviors. They're people solving problems in the moment with the tools that they have available to them. You know, I haven't been in France in 20 years. I spent yesterday afternoon walking around the city. And I used my phone to solve problems of how to navigate it, to talk to people, to read signs, to navigate it. Well, everything that I did there, I learned so much through that process, even though there was no education or training opportunities going on in that. I was just existing in a digital world and learning through the tools that are available to me. And that's the lens through which we need to look at digital learning. Because if you want to understand how technology is going to change how we learn, you have to look at how technology is changing how we live. It's how we live our daily lives in an increasingly digital world that is really shaping the potential of what digital learning is. It's way more than just education and training. Education and training are an important component, but as we look at how we as individuals, how the organizations we work for are looking at learning going forward, it's about a much bigger umbrella than just education and training. So essentially what we're talking about here is disruption. Now, disruption to me is another fascinating word, because disruption is something that is a word that people have a visceral reaction to. It's either, ooh, it's going to disrupt things, it's going to change things, that's not going to be good. Or it's the flip side of it of, ooh, disruption, that's a big buzzword. We have to disrupt things. What are we going to disrupt? I don't know, but we have to disrupt something because disruption's good. But disruption is a completely neutral word. It just simply means a change in the status quo. And what makes a disruption viewed as positive or negative is not the change itself, but how we react to it. And we as learning professionals have been through this before. How many of you come from an environment where you work in class, you either did classroom training, maybe you're still doing it today? Okay. It's always a good gauge for how old I'm getting because the hands are less and less each time I ask that question. But I come from a world where this is all I did. I spent 15 years in finance. This was what training was. And then suddenly this computer emerged, and we had this new thing called e-learning that emerged. And it was a radically different change. It disrupted the status quo. My question for you is, who did e-learning disrupt? Who was it disruptive to? Any ideas? I think I heard trainers. Learners, I thought I heard. Anybody else? You've hit two of the three that I would identify with. Yeah, absolutely. So the three that I would target within this, three groups. The first group are the learners themselves. Now, bit of a disclaimer on this image here. I work for the eLearning Guild. I am passionate about the work that we do. I think technology-based education and training can truly transform people's lives. It's why I do the work that I do and why I've been a passionate member of this field for 20 some odd years. All of that said, no one in the history of e-learning has ever been that happy to take a course. But this was really disruptive to the world of the learner. We are conditioned from 12 plus years of school as to what learning looks like. Learning looks like this. There's an instructor in the front of the room conveying information to students or learners who want to learn something. And now you want me to sit in front of this computer and click next and watch videos and engage in online forums? I don't know what that means. We take it for granted today that it's just commonplace, but when it first emerged, it was really disruptive to the people who had to go through that as a learning experience. The next group, the trainers themselves. When I was a trainer, this was my world. This was my comfort zone. I worked in Microsoft Word and InDesign to put together my facilitator guide and my workshop guides, and I was really happy in that place. And now you want me to build a drag and drop interaction? What am I dragging? Why am I dropping it? And what is happening to my career? That's kind of really the disruptive nature that happened to this. I'm seeing the gauge here of those of you who lived through it smiling. It was really disruptive to trainers. The third group that I would add is the organizations themselves. Organizations have workflows. Organizations have resources that are allocated in certain ways. And when e-learning first emerged, a lot of organizations looked at it and said, hold on a second. Rather than me spending the money to fly people to the training center, to pay for their food, to pay for their hotels and all of that stuff so they can go through 3 days of training, they can do it at their computer, at their desk. Sign me up. I'm good with that. Now, when e-learning first emerged, you could make the argument that organizations leaned a little too hard towards that value proposition. But the fact of the matter is, it was seen as a positive disruption to the organizations because of the cost savings that it enabled them to take advantage of. So again, disruption is not positive or negative, it's how we react to it. And I bring in that context because the emergence of e-learning, the personal computer and the emergence of e-learning was one disruption that happened at one time. And that's what makes the environment that we're in right now extremely unique, because there are multiple things happening at the same time that are disrupting the world of work and the work that we do to support that workplace. So if you think the disruption of e-learning was really a lot, I have bad news for you, because there is a lot of things that are going on. Now, normally when I do this presentation, I do it over either an hour or even longer, and I can get into the weeds of a lot of different things. I'm going to focus on the 6 or 7 primary things that I see disrupting the world of work. There are others, of course, but I wanted to focus on some of the big ones and to add some context around them that can be applied to any disruption that's out there. And I also put these in a bit of a chronological order around things that are happening either now or sooner to things that are happening later. Now, an important piece of context that I think is really important to realize is that there is no right or wrong attached to these. If I say something that's happening now and you're sitting there going, wow, that's not even on our organization's radar, that's not anything we're close to, that's fine. And if I say something's 10, 20 years out, and you think, wow, we're doing that today, maybe we're too soon, that could be fine too. It's not about me sitting here telling you what you should be doing. It's me giving you the context so that you can decide for yourself, based on the unique context of your work and the organizations you work for, what the right solutions are. So I think that's important to realize. I have put these in a bit of a chronological context. I'm really struggling to stay behind this desk. All of that said, let's start looking at some of these trends. So the first one is a trend that for many of us you're looking at now: multi-device learning, building learning programs for the idea that they can be used on any device that you're using. What's the common phrase used to describe the design with multiple devices in mind? Responsive design. If you're not familiar with that term, responsive design means that I'm going to design it in a way that the content displays appropriately for the devices that I happen to be using. We used to have this idea of mobile learning, and for those of you that were around when smartphones just emerged, what we did with the mobile learning is we took it and we shrunk this screen onto a mobile phone so that it couldn't be read. It was very effective. Responsive design gets around that, and it reformats the content so that it's appropriate to consume on your screen, which does sound like a good thing. But I'm going to preface it by saying it's not enough. Responsive design is great, but it's not enough. You don't want to hear me cough for the next 10 minutes. The reason that I say responsive design is not enough is it repeats a mistake we make very often in our field. Go back to the emergence of e-learning. What was e-learning when it first emerged? What does it look like? It looks like the classroom put on a computer. We took the PowerPoints, we took the lecture notes, we put it all on a computer so that people could do it on their own, which puts us in the wrong context. It puts us at the assuming of what learning looks like. I would argue that one of the things we do fairly often in our industry is that we approach new technologies with the wrong question. A new technology emerges and we say, wow, how do I do what I do on this new technology? And that's the wrong question, because it puts you in the box of what you do. If all you do with a new technology is just do what you already do, then what was the real benefit of that new technology? It's why e-learning, a lot of e-learning, especially when it first emerged, basically looked like the course that we were doing in a workshop online. and it ignored the unique affordances of the technology, the fact that it has a computer processor, it's got this screen, it's got a mouse, it's got a keyboard, all the different ways that you can input and engage with a computer are gone to waste while I sit there and I click a next button for a half an hour. If that's all you're doing is automating the process. We're doing the same thing with mobile learning, with these multiple devices here. Responsive design is great, but it's still treating your content as if it's just content that needs to be absorbed through a screen. But if you think about your smartphone that you probably have in your pocket, it is so much more than a screen. It has a camera, it has an accelerometer, it has a GPS that has the context of where you are at any given moment. And trust me, Google knows. All of these different things that are out there, all this context is completely lost if all you're doing is treating it as another screen. You have to look at a technology not and say, how do I do what I do through this new technology, but look at it and say, how does this new technology change what I do? What could I do with this new technology that I've never done before? Think about your phones, so the smartphones you have in your pocket for a second. It is now 2:15. I have probably used my phone somewhere around 68 different times today, for different purposes, for probably 60 different purposes, none of which have been to make a phone call. And now think about how you've used your phone so far today. Now take that knowledge and compare it to how your organization is using these devices in the context of learning. I would venture to guess there's a gap. That gap is the gap of opportunity that I'm talking about. I used my phone so much yesterday as I navigated this city. Never was it part of any sort of a formal learning program. I used it to solve problems. I used it to learn more about the places that I was visiting. It was just part of the way that I was naturally learning. That's not how we're using them in the context of mobile learning in most organizations. So when we look at multi-device learning, I encourage you to look at it through a broader level of what can these devices do to enable learning and to enable people to solve problems on their own. Another example, interactive video. I touch on this one specifically because most people put interactive video in a much smaller box than its greater potential. Interactive video, you'll see it if you go around here, where there's a lot of opportunities for people to have a more interactive experience with the video, usually in the case of a branching scenario, where almost like a choose-your-own-adventure model, for those of you that ever read those kind of books as a kid that I did. Where you'd watch a segment of a video and then get to a point where you can choose different decisions, and a different segment of the video will play based on that. And yes, that is an interactive experience, but it's not the context of interactive video I'm talking about here. I'm talking about the type of stuff that Google and other video platforms are doing, where the searchability of what you can do with video makes the usability of video exponentially more valuable. For instance, I am the type of homeowner who, when I do something in my house, the first thing I do before I pick up a phone and call someone to do the work for me is I will Google it. I will look to see if there's a video that can show me how to do it myself. I'm not handy, so 99 out of 100 times I'm watching the video to verify, nope, I can't do that. But usually I can find it. Usually I'll find a video that is at least in the space. Now, if there was something wrong with my toilet and I wanted to see if I could fix it myself, I could Google it, and what it would come back in the search results is things that match the title, maybe things that are the author, maybe something in the context of the video in the comments. That's how it would bring up the videos. But it could, what all the video platforms are doing now is adding the context, the meta context. All of the words that someone says in the video become context that makes it searchable. All of the things that are seen in the video becomes context that you could do in searching. So put it in the context of the example I was doing in my house. Any of that context could be seen in it. I could type in what sound the toilet is making, and if somebody described that in the video, a video would come back showing me that segment of the video where someone described that sound, likely leading me faster to the solution that I need. In that context, video becomes a much, much more powerful tool in the context of learning and performance. And this technology exists today. There might even be some providers in here who are playing in this space. But when that context just becomes mainstream, it applies to the YouTube searches you're doing today, it transforms how video can be used to solve problems and learn in the moment. Next one, data and analytics. What's the two-word phrase that is the big buzzword in data and analytics? Big data. It's data, but it's big. I think that we're losing the phrase, we're missing the point on the data. The data is, the fact that there's a lot of data, the big is not the part that's really important about the data. What's really important is the fact that we now have computers that can process this information, that the size of the data set is no longer a barrier to really process that information. And it's one of the reasons I love this image here. And I wish I knew where it originally originated from so that I could credit the person for it, but this to me is really driving home the value of it. It's not about the data, it's not about the organization of the data, it's about the ability to use all of that processing power to inform the decisions that we're making. And that is going to transform the future of work, and thus to transform the role that we play in supporting work. There's another broader context that I always bring up in this with big data that I think is important for you all to realize, is that there are things there are trends that you're going to be able to harness in your work and bring into your organizations proactively. If you're not in a position to do that, that doesn't mean you have no responsibility related to the trend. And I bring it up in the context of big data because some of you may be in a position where you can drive the adoption of this in your organization. And if you are, great. But if you're not, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be following along what's going on in the big data conversation, because eventually this will transform every organization on the planet. Some of you, it may have already happened. Some of you may be working in an organization and it may not really impact you for 20 years. Not likely, but it's possible. But it's not a when, it's not an if, it's a when, that big data. And essentially that means that even if you're not driving this, eventually you'll get a knock on the door that your IT department says, hey, we installed some new applications that are AI driven and they're going to have a lot of data analytics. We're going to be pulling from your LMS or your LRS or whatever it is you happen to do, pulling it into a bigger data set, and we're going to need you to be a part of this project. You don't want to be in that moment and say, that's great, just give me 5 minutes to Google everything that you just said. You want to be in a situation where you're at least able to participate in that conversation so that when it comes and you have this conversation, you have the context. There's a skill that I think L&D professionals need to develop, which I refer to as conversational competence. My mother would describe it as knowing enough to be dangerous. But I would describe it as conversational competence so that you're at least knowledgeable enough about the trends that are affecting your organization so that if they are presented to you, you are ready to participate in the conversation. It's going to enable you to be a much better partner within your organizations. Next one, augmented reality. Augmented reality is a tool that is going to change the way that we work. It is going to change the way that we live. It is further behind, ooh, sorry about that. It is further behind, this is why I don't like standing behind podiums. It is further behind virtual reality in terms of its current adoption, in terms of the consumer market, but once it hits a mainstream adoption, it is going to surpass the value proposition of what virtual reality can do. Virtual reality will be a very powerful but narrow tool. Augmented reality will be a very broad and powerful tool. If you start looking at how spatial computing is going out, or spatial computing being computers that you're not looking at a screen, you're looking at all the computing thing in the space around you, it is going to transform how we work. There are two aspects of augmented reality that I think are important for L&D professionals to look at. The first is the one that we already do, which is how can I use a tool like this in the context of learning? The second is the more important one, which is how is our organization going to be using these? This is not a learning device. This is a productivity device. And what that means is that it's going to transform the way that people are doing their jobs. So there's the aspect of what we use this for as a tool for L&D, but there's also how is L&D going to support the use of this in work? And that is a big component of how this is going to transform our work. The other thing I think is important to point out is I intentionally choose this figure. Right now, augmented reality is available on most phones that you're carrying right now. And it is a component. I don't really feel it's a powerful component. I feel like it's a stepping guide because the reality is I can do this and have an augmented reality aspect to what I'm doing, but I can't do anything with it because I've got this thing in my hand. I can't interact with it much because this is literally in my hands. When I have the headset on, I can interact with things because my hands are free. And that's where the transformative power of AR comes in, is when these headsets become normalized in a way that they are just part of the workforce. Next up, workflow learning. Workflow learning is a huge buzzword within our industry. It's transforming how we're doing. There are a lot of different buzzwords. There are a lot of different ways that I could have described this slide. I could have done workflow learning. I could have called it micro-learning. I could have called it performance support, just-in-time training, or whatever other buzzword we want to apply to it. This concept of working within the work of people doing, when I was in banking, I described this to my workers without a label. The way I described it is, listen, when we build this program, I want to build something in the least disruptive way possible. I want to find a way to get this as close to the work as possible without removing people from the work so that they can learn. I didn't know I was talking about these things, but that's essentially what it is. The reason why it's such a buzzword right now is because technology has caught up with the promise. These concepts of doing that have been around for decades, but technology has caught up to the promise. We have solutions in this hall that enable people to play in the space, that enables people to solve a problem while they're working, rather than interrupting work so they can learn and then apply what they've learned. That is going to be a business need that is critical for us to support as learning and development professionals. I personally like the label workflow learning because it describes exactly what it is, giving people the opportunity to learn and solve problems while they're working. Then we've got artificial intelligence. AI is an underpinning of all of these things. This image is one that resonates with me. A lot of times when we see artificial intelligence being described, it's usually attached to an image like this. The robots are taking over, they're taking our jobs, and they're going to kill us like in the Terminator. AI is not about robots. Robots are a very visual demonstration of AI in process, but the AI and robots discussions is not the real point of the thing. It's not about technology replacing us, it's about us working with technology. It's about opportunities for technology to offload things that the technology is better at so that humans can better focus on the things that are human value generated. And the reality is, a lot of people say, well, I can't wait until AI transforms my life. A lot of this is invisible. AI is already transforming our lives. Most of it we just don't see. One of the most important shows that I follow every single year isn't the shows that I do, although my boss would be really unhappy to hear me say that. It's the Consumer Electronics Show that takes place in Las Vegas every year. Because that's where you see how technology is changing our daily lives, including artificial intelligence. That's how you see how just daily life is changing, because that's going to shape expectations around learning and education. And then the last trend I'll throw out to you is this idea of the Internet of Things, which is where it all gets connected. I'm going to paint a picture for you about learning and work in the future. I'm wearing my Apple Watch right now. As soon as I clasp this and put in my code, it is able to verify that it is me because I put in my code. This not only takes signals, but it can give out a signal. So I could be walking around broadcasting a verified signal that I am David Kelley. I walk up to a piece of equipment that I need to do my job with, and it automatically unlocks because it knows I'm the one about to use it. But more importantly, it uses its Internet of Things, the fact that everything is connected to the internet. This machine is connected to the internet, it goes through the internet, it connects to our competency management system to recognize my ability to use this piece of equipment, whether I'm a beginner, an intermediate, or an expert with it. And it gives me the appropriate layer of support as a user to be effective in using that piece of equipment. That's not science fiction. All of the components of that experience exist today, and people like in this vendor hall are working on packaging them in a way to make it a seamless experience. That's the future of what we are going to need to support in terms of our workforces. So what does this mean to the future of L&D as I close here? It means three major things that I think we need to keep on our radar. First one is a broader approach to the work that we do. We at the Guild have called this over the last couple of years, this idea of a learning and performance ecosystem, that education and training is a small piece of, but encompasses any particular way that someone could learn how to do their jobs in the future. The next one is this idea of learning personalization. Now, with all due respect to all of the vendors playing in this space, a lot of them say that they offer learning personalization. I don't think that we're there yet, because I don't think it's incorporating all of the context necessary. I think where personalization currently is defined as recommendation engines, as compared to a truly personalized experience like I was just describing that recognizes my competency. And the last, and I come back to where I end with where we started, is this idea of digital learning. Digital learning to me is not something, if you find yourself talking about digital learning and you're describing behaviors related to training and education, I think you're leaving the power of this phrase off the table. We need to be talking about digital learning in the concepts of behaviors that describe learning activities. What are people doing to learn? Not about how they're going to train. We tend to talk about learning in this context of how we're going to train people, how we're going to educate people. Take the spotlight off of ourselves and focus more on the behaviors that people are doing to learn to do their jobs. With that, I want to remind you of that URL at the end. It will take you to this blog post, which has my slides, as well as a host of different resources. And my time is out, but here's how you can contact me if you want to continue this discussion. I'm happy to talk to anyone. I'll be in the hall the rest of the day. I want to thank you and encourage you to enjoy the rest of your time here at the conference. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much.